Good morning. I feel very privileged to be standing here today. Thank you so much for having me as part of your congregation. It's the first time that I've been invited to provide a reflection as part of a Uniting Church service. And in these days after Easter, it is indeed a very special and significant time. The reading from the Gospel of John that we just heard speaks to me of how this last encounter with Jesus changed Peter's path again. Having returned to his life as a fisherman after the loss of Christ, he again encounters Jesus by the water's edge. Feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep, follow me. Peter was forgiven and his relationship with Jesus was restored. And Peter's path was changed. He was back in the service of God, called to nourish the vulnerable and sustain God's people. I began rediscovering the Uniting Church in late 2017, so just over about a year and a half ago, when I learned that the chief executive role at Uniting was coming up, and I began my research to see if I should change my path. I discovered a church that is really genuinely committed to diversity, really deeply values diversity, and literally welcomes you exactly as you are. I was surprised, I was curious, I was inspired, and I was called. And having now been in the role for 12 months, this encounter with Jesus through the work of the church has changed my path and has already changed me. I think thus far I've lived a very privileged life, perhaps in a bubble. Middle Australia, safe, secure, a loving though complex family to grow up in, which included a mother who taught all four of her daughters born in the 60s that there's no such word as can't. And a loving family of my own. My husband Mark of 35 years, my two boys Mitchell and Peter, and now their lovely partners who've come to enrich our family. I had access to education and opportunity and a successful and very meaningful career in healthcare. As Margaret said, the majority of my career has been in Catholic healthcare. Organisations like the St Vincent's Group, the Mater Hospitals in Queensland, and most recently St John of God Healthcare. It was for me a great privilege to work in these organisations. I found great meaning being in the service of others. These healthcare ministries are inspired by the healing ministry of Christ, and I'd learned that anyone, religious or not, who acts with compassion in their heart can bring this work to life. And so coming to work with the Uniting Church through its services and advocacy agency Uniting, I've already experienced some extraordinary events and insights just in my first year. They have changed me, and I'd like to share some of them with you this morning. I've been on the road a lot. Uniting is spread all over the state of New South Wales and ACT. And every time I have experienced a welcome to country from a traditional custodian of the land where I stood, I have been truly struck by the generosity of that welcome. Even though I'm part of the society that has benefited from their suffering and their loss, I have been gifted the spirits to keep me safe wherever I was and any time that I returned to that place. So generous and so inclusive. I was really delighted to find, and I'm very proud, that Uniting employs almost 300 Aboriginal people, and we offer a range of services to support Aboriginal people in their communities. But we know we can, and we know we must, do more. Our board has just signed off on a renewed Reconciliation Action Plan, which calls us to be even better at employing Aboriginal people, to support Aboriginal people in their paths to self-determination, and to use our loud voice to confront the injustices that affect Aboriginal people. Before coming to Uniting, I think I was quite ignorant. I still am in many ways. I have a lot to learn about Aboriginal people. But I think I felt hopeless, that what could one person do with all this difficulty? How could I make a difference? But now, as part of Uniting and as part of the church, I can read something like the Assembly's vision for a just Australia, which is referenced in your newsletter this week, and a First People's heart. And I'm hopeful and I'm inspired to act, to try and help Indigenous cultures be better understood and celebrated by all Australians, to try and support Aboriginal businesses and create even more employment opportunities. I think at Uniting and in the church, I think we're inspired by Jesus, not so much the healing ministry, but as a social reformer. And this area, this part of Australia is an area that really does need more reform. As part of my travels, I found myself in a car with one of our care workers taking a call, grappling with the difficulties of placing an Aboriginal child with their grandmother, only to find that her new boyfriend made the placement unsafe. It was a Friday afternoon. Where now? In a recent, very serious incident, our staff literally said that the children's safety matters more than our own and we must go, even though it was too dangerous. Not even the police were willing to attend this particular location. It was remote and it was already dark. Of course, we cannot compromise the safety of our people, even in the service of others. They have people who love them and rely on them. But nonetheless, the dedication and capability of Uniting's people to be in these hard places is extraordinary, and they too have changed me. Uniting employs over 9,000 people and more than 2,000 volunteers to do the work of Uniting, to work in the service of the church, to serve the most vulnerable, as Jesus served, to make the world a better place. The leadership team at Uniting and myself are deeply committed to the safety of our people, with an aspiration of making Uniting a place where they will flourish. But please rest assured, those children are safe. They were recovered the next day with the help of 2 other agencies, including the police, diligent efforts that made them safe. But there's no denying their path ahead, because of their family circumstances, is complicated and difficult. At daybreak, when Jesus stood on the beach and said to the unsuccessful fishermen, "Cast the net to the right side of the boat," he was calling out to these expert fishermen that there may be another way of working. In many ways, the people of Uniting are expert fishermen, or at least they are expert at what they do: nursing, teaching, caring, building things, managing the finances, and so on. But because we are part of the church, we are inspired to and able to work in other ways. We can throw our net out the other side. We are called to. One of the ways Uniting is trying to work differently is through what we call our Future Horizons strategy. Here we seek to invest in ways that will change the systems that trap people in cycles of disadvantage. The state funds us to provide foster services like the ones I've been describing for children and young people, and we do this to the very best of our ability. But putting on our Future Horizons hat, we endeavour to do more. Knowing that young people who leave, whose foster support finishes when they're age 18, are far more likely to end up in jail, to be unemployed, to have insecure housing, perhaps to be pregnant at a very young age. We're investing $7 million over the next few years to provide these young people with a service that we call extended care, support to transition to a home of their own, perhaps to enrol in TAFE, to get a job, to be successful in that job, to learn how to pay their bills. Just the things that my 2 sons had to make them have a greater chance of a successful life. And the outcomes of this work will be independently and rigorously evaluated and documented, as we hope to convince the government that investing in services like these is indeed great value for money, investing for social impact, changing the lives of these young people. And of course, you would know Uniting for our very large aged care services. And in these services, we're trying to find ways of working differently as well. Older people are some of the most vulnerable in our community, and we're hopeful that the Aged Care Royal Commission will awaken the apathy and the ageism that exists in our community. We want to debate what levels of care we aspire to for our older Australians and develop new approaches and find ways of funding them so that they can actually live a life that is something that they can enjoy and we can be proud of supporting. Institutional care has been abolished from children's services, mental health, disability services, with orphanages and asylums long gone. It needs to go from aged care as well. Our vision at Uniting for Australians, for older Australians, will be delivered through an integrated community model where we meet the person wherever they are on their life journey. Our residential facilities are one by one being transformed to a more home-like environment where they can choose when they wake, what they eat, make their own choices to live a life that's meaningful for them. Our staff are trained and engaged in our Inspired Life program. It's an approach where we're looking to improve each person's quality of life and supporting them in a holistic way, in the way that they choose, where they choose, their home or perhaps one of ours. As the largest provider of aged care services in New South Wales and ACT, and one of the largest in Australia, we're modelling new approaches, and we're working with Uniting Care Australia, trying to advocate for change right around the country. In a world that keeps changing and not necessarily or always in the right direction, we're seeing suffering grow and inequality widen. The haves and the have-nots, the Muslims and the others, Aboriginal people and other Australians. We're seeing the planet consumed and polluted by that consumption, putting at risk the very future of future generations. So at Uniting, I'm really pleased to be part of a movement inspired by Jesus as an inspiring and effective social disruptor to make the world a better place. Working with other parts of the church, we can bring a loud voice to social injustice. One of the last experience I'd like to share with you is the recent town hall event organised by the Sydney Alliance, where 2,500 people gathered to call for change in housing security, affordability and energy policy. On this occasion, the team at Uniting worked very closely with all of you here at Pitt Street. Everyone donned matching black t-shirts, gathered here for some warm hospitality and their marching orders. Then they stood together to call for change. I was on the stage with other church leaders and could see literally hundreds of Uniting Church people in a block, rocking the boat to shift the systems that trap people in cycles of disadvantage. It was inspiring, and it gives me great hope that we can cast the net out the other side and all work together in ways to change the world. But I'm also conscious of the history of how Uniting has been created, and we know the relationship we have with some other parts of the church needs more nourishment and continuing efforts. In today's readings, we heard Jesus ask Peter 3 times if he loved him, and Peter said, "You know that I do." Their relationship was restored. The generosity of Jesus' forgiveness of Peter meant that Peter's past did not define his future. He was back in the service of God, called to nourish the vulnerable and sustain God's people. It is my great hope that, like the recent town hall event, we can keep repairing and regenerating our relationships, finding ways together to nourish the most vulnerable, to share the opportunities of this wonderful country more fairly, and to protect the planet. Together we can change the paths of many. Thank you again for having me here this morning to reflect on the Gospel of John and to think about my work at Uniting in a different way. These days following Easter and the resurrection are very special, and I'm grateful for the opportunity.